Do you remember the date that you got there? Or if you, I don't know if you know, or if you could say the specific date.
I don't. I honestly don't remember the exact date on it. It was July. It was in July.
What was the vibe like? Was there like a sense of urgency? Were people like, oh shit, everything's kind of crashing down right now, or was it still kind of like, what's happening? Wait, we gotta start
No,
processing these visas.
the that was what was odd to me. Is like I got there and they're like, all right, well, we're gonna reevaluate like how many people we actually need after 90 days, and I'm going, okay. They had just had a COVID outbreak there at the embassy, and so that was one of the reasons they had kind of ramped up staffing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I get there and they're like, well, we're good now. There's no COVID, but we've got this and that going on, and we're thinking about building a hospital or something like that. And so I'm going. I'm going, are you guys not thinking about like getting out of here? And they're like, no, 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 the mission's going to continue after this. It's not, nobody was worried. Nobody was worried when I first got there, except for, the people that kind of knew the deal. And, but as far as like the Department of State and all that kind of stuff, I don't think any of them were worried. I mean, they still had guys like painting buildings and like, doing new construction and stuff like that. I'm going, I don't think you guys know how quickly this is going to go down. It's a much different world behind 30-foot walls of the embassy. I mean, you don't even feel like you're in Afghanistan. I can remember I was there for like a week already, and I hadn't really done too much like exploring around the embassy grounds. But one of the paramedics that works in the clinic with me, he's like, oh, let me take you on a quick tour. And so we hop on the gator, and I can remember we went over to the west wall of the embassy, and you get some of the entry control points there, and the wind blew, and I'm like, oh man, there it is. Like I haven't had that smell in over a decade. Like I smelled Afghanistan again,
Yeah.
and it was a very distinct smell. You're like, wow, okay, it's been blocked by all these super high walls, and now I'm like, wow, I am really in Afghanistan. And I can remember, I mean, most of my day there was spent, you might not believe it, I was laying out by the pool and like, going to
I believe it.
and just and eating at the DFAC, and I can remember laying out by the pool one of the days, and I heard, I believe I heard a car bomb that went off like in one of the police districts nearby or something. It was real faint, but you get that thud,
Yeah. That.
organs. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
that was a pretty good explosion. And I heard about it, like later that day or something like that. And I'm going, wow, this is such a weird, dichotomy here. I'm like here hanging out by the pool, and in the State Department does not live unwell. I mean, we had like 4 channels of HBO in our rooms. We had like a little apartment,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
and it was all super nice and super clean and everything like that. And I'm going, just 1,000 yards that way, it's still a freaking war zone. So,
Yeah.
and things are falling apart.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy, man. It's so crazy. So when you got there, people weren't freaking out. You weren't there. You weren't called up as a reinforcement because they saw all this negative shit happening. And what was your role then? You were just there as a normal like
So
contractor to do medical stuff.
yeah, so my main role, you kind of had 2 roles. So like Department of State, they have their own medical people, and it's not huge staffing. I don't know if I can get into the staffing levels, but they have their own medical people, and then you have our role. So we take care of everybody else at the embassy.
Mm.
So contractors, all the third country nationals, all the local, the indigenous personnel that work on the embassy, and so we have a clinic that we would run. And so the other part of our role was, okay, if something bad happens, you're going to run all the mass casualty stuff, or you're going to be a part of all the mass casualty stuff. And so we had, our designated areas where we would go to handle mass cas. But yeah, so I mean, you're kind of there as an insurance policy because they need you there because it's they've got enough people that's like, hey, we're going to need this many providers if the shit really hits the fan.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of how I looked at it. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of, hanging out. You don't feel like you're really, doing a whole lot, but you're really there as kind of like at the fire department. You're an insurance policy,
Yeah.
and you hope nothing bad happens, and you hope people don't need to use you, but you're there in case they do.
So how did everything start to change? Like, how did you see it? Could you feel it? Like, I mean, the sense of urgency and the need to get people out of the country had to have started ramping up at that point.
Yeah, so I would say I think it's like 3 or 4 days before we actually left. We had a teams meeting with our company, and they were like, "Hey, we got to let everybody know we are going to leave. We're under order departure, is what they call it, and but it's not happening just yet, and we're not all leaving." So the thought then was, "Hey, we're going to collapse down to Kaya, to the airport, and run all the embassy operations out of there." And we had a clinic over there too.
Mm-hmm.
And with a whole another staffing set. And so they were like, "We're going to need some people to stay. So if you want to stay, let us know." And I was thinking about it. I was like, I kind of want to be here I want to see what happens. Now I'm like, I'm intrigued. I'm like, I want to see how this all goes down.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, but I'm sitting here thinking to myself still, I'm like, they were saying, "Okay, we're going to continue to be here." And I'm going, "No, you're not. Like, it's going to get bad." Like, and I think the thought process there of going from the embassy to Kaya is because we didn't really have the capacity to do a lot of like ground evac. You didn't really have the vehicle numbers and things like that. So they do everything by airlift basically, and it's like a 3-minute Chinook ride from the either Kaya to the embassy or vice versa. And so I'm sitting here thinking about like, well, what's my backup plan? Like when it really goes down, if these guys don't take this seriously pretty soon, like how am I going to get out of there? And I'm like, on Google Earth, like looking at the routes that I might take if I got to like get out of here on my own or something. But we'd all like joke about it, like kind of not joking, like, "Oh, are we gonna get airlifted like Saigon, like getting off the roof of the embassy or something like that. Like, how do we need to get up there and all that kind of stuff?" But it started to change. A few days later after that meeting, they were like, "Okay, well, we're going to be here till this date, and then we're out." And so they go, "But have your bags packed anyways." And so I'm kind of like, "Okay, so I got to have all my bags packed, but we're going to stay for another month." But so then I go back. I can remember they were like, "Hey, we're going to start destroying some stuff, some of the more sensitive items." And so we start shredding papers and, taking stuff to the burn pit and doing that kind of, they got a crushing machine that crushes some of the larger items and things like that. And we start getting a plan for, how are we going to start getting rid of some of these things that we don't want the Taliban to have. And we went, and it was in the afternoon, and they said, "Hey, we need everybody back at the clinic right now because we're really going to start getting rid of stuff." That morning we were like, "We'll get rid of a few things," but then they're like, "No, we're really going to start getting rid of stuff." So that was when we went back, and it was like, okay, now we got to start smashing computers with hammers, and we got to figure out what the hell we're going to do with this X-ray machine, and like how we're going to get rid of this stuff. And it was kind of like a mad dash to kind of like, I mean, I watched Argo on the plane ride over.
Yeah.
I remember that scene. And I was thinking to myself when I was watching, I was like, I probably shouldn't be watching this on the way over here. But there's that scene where they're shredding all the documents and they're doing stuff, breaking down the embassy. And it was, I can't say it was unlike that. It was kind of like that. And so, it was kind of, chaos with that. And so we go, and then we got everything kind of squared away in the clinic as much as possible, as much as they wanted to anyways. And then they were like, "All right, just, you head back to your rooms, but stand by because we're probably leaving in the next 24, 48 hours. Well, like, I got back in my room, and like an hour later, they're like, "Get your shit and get downstairs now." They're like, "We're gone. We're out of here."
Really?
Yeah. So we all like went downstairs, and we just waited outside for they had brought in a few military. That was when they had said they were sending in Marines.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Oh, we're going to send 5,000 Marines." And I swear, when we finally did get over to Kaya, there was like 50 dudes there, and they looked scared as hell.
That was probably the advance party. Like, oh shit, here we go.
I think it was a fast team. I think that's who it was. Yeah. So, but yeah, it was that part was kind of like, okay, didn't realize it was going to get, this crazy
It
towards it.
ramped up real quick.
Yeah, it did. It did. And I heard I was on one of the earlier chalks going out, luckily for me. But I mean, even some of my friends that were on the later chalks, I mean, they were telling me things. They were like, they were on the C-17, and one of the guys, the canine handler, he said he was on the C-17, and they were sitting there and they saw their weapons with them, and he just heard somebody go lock and load, and they looked out the back of the plane, and there was a horde of Afghans running at the back of the plane, and